Good evening. It is 1 year this week since the COVID pandemic was first felt in our town. I would ask that all who are able to please rise and join members of council and myself in a moment of silence for the victims of COVID-19. Thank you. You may be seated. I know there were some members of council who wanted to add comments on this time before we proceed further in the meeting, so I would welcome Councillor Roy at this time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And this past year has been a very trying year for many, for all. And last week I had the opportunity to have a discussion with one of our CCU nurses, and something that has really resonated with me is more with the fact of how COVID has changed the way that the ability to be with a loved one as they are passing. And that ability is limited, and it is essentially basically through technology. And to know that you have lost a loved one through COVID is very hard and very trying on all, because the grieving process really is not enabled. And even through the having to have a funeral and having to have a proper funeral and closure, we have lost many friends during this time of COVID, but for every person that has been lost, there's a story that has been lost as well too, and each one has shared their story with many caregivers and health caregivers, and it's a discussion that we have on a regular basis with my colleagues and the nurses, the doctors, and it's really changed the way as to how we have seen the passing and the inability of working together with the families as well too, and it needs to go away. And I feel for every family who has lost somebody, and I've come to know quite a few who have lost their family member and still grieve, even though it's been quite some time, that maybe 6 months, maybe 3 months, but we all talk about the stories of the individuals that have been lost in the hospital, and I just wish that we can move forward with it. And I feel very much for those families, and give them all my best and condolences, and hopefully that the stories will be told, and that we can remember the stories of any resident of the town of Whitby that has been lost as well. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Roy, for your fine comments. Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Your Worship. I also wish to offer my deepest sympathy for the dear families of those who have suffered loss. Please know that you are in our thoughts and prayers every day and always. May you have many blessings and peace.
Thank you, Councillor Newman. Councillor Yamada.
Thank you, Your Worship. And this has been a tough year for our community. We've experienced loss, personal loss, community loss, and the light we see is at the end of the tunnel. The vaccinations have started for those 80 plus, and we are extremely grateful to those who have worked on this project to get us here and to ensure that our loved ones who are elderly start getting their vaccinations, and to Dr. Kyle and the team for doing their best under unprecedented circumstances is commendable. And, you know, throughout our community and Durham region, we've gotten to know families and hear about their stories of lost loved ones from Sunnycrest. What happened at that home was absolutely horrific. To the 34 residents who lost their lives due to the second wave of the pandemic, we're still grieving. And again, condolences to all and to everyone out who's still fighting and businesses that are struggling. We will be here for you and ensure that better days are ahead. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Yamada. Councillor Leahy.
Thank you, Your Worship. So yeah, again, just a super challenging year because it's difficult on the kids that aren't able to go to school fully effectively or interact with their children. That's even my family, the challenges of in the physicians out there, and all the stresses and other things that my wife has had to go through, and the ups and downs and the challenges that are ongoing. So you see that in the medical area. Personally, for a lot of people, just the loneliness of a lot of residents that are out there, and that the challenges that you have, missing out on. I know I've missed out on many actually family weddings. I've had a couple passings, a couple funerals that I've had to miss out on too, and another one just this week. And it's just so sad that these people you've known your entire life, and you can't spend good times with them when they celebrate a wedding, and you can't say goodbye to them when they pass away. So it's a real challenging time. The good news is that I know the residents of town are resilient. There's some positives about this. When you are out and about, you do see people are so willing to talk and chat with you and be friendly when you're just walking in the neighborhood, because people are really missing and struggling for that human connection and that human interaction. So it's great that here at the town and at the region we're doing everything we can to try and support the residents with the vaccine rollout to try and get our businesses back up and running and our residents back to a better sense of normalcy and interaction. So grateful for the days ahead and remorseful for those that we have lost, but looking forward to the good times ahead. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Leahy. Councillor Shahid.
Thank you, Mayor Mitchell. We've definitely been through an extraordinary year, and I know that we will be looking at another year of lots of good things coming to us that will heal our community. I'd like to acknowledge all the people who have worked together to stand up for each other, the food banks, the nurses, the community people who have come together for each other. Caremongers have done an extraordinary job all throughout Durham region. I know that what it has taught me patience. And I know we Canadians are very resilient. I know together we will do better. And lastly, I would like to pay my condolences to all who have lost their loved ones due to this pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shahid. Councillor Drum.
Thank you, Your Worship. Along with the other members of Council, I would like to extend my heartfelt condolences to all those who have lost someone, a loved one, to those that have suffered loss in their lives in any way, shape, or form. We are there for you, and my heart aches for you. And just know that I hold you all very close in my thoughts and my prayers.
Okay, thank you very much, members of council. And now,
Mayor Mitchell?
oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Mulcahy.
I'm sorry, I put it in the chat. I don't know if it didn't show up. I'm having a little trouble
No,
seeing.
you're right. The others were coming from email, but yeah, please carry on.
Oh, sorry. I just would like to extend my most sincere condolences. We're at 2.6 million deceased around the world. and 117 million cases. And of those, we know that a lot are long haulers and are suffering. And of course, 2.6 million. It's huge. It's just massive. And I think that the enormity of it is something that we all need to pause and think about, you know, beyond our daily, I can't go out, I can't do things, I'm limited in my life. You know, this is it's much bigger than our day-to-day inconveniences. And I know that it's getting trying for a lot of us, but I feel like we're on the precipice of change, and I think that the vaccines coming in, as they start to come in quicker, we will start to see that herd immunity, and hopefully we can come out of this and be a stronger community and understand where our strengths and weaknesses are and really show compassion for one another. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, perhaps members of council. Welcome to the council meeting. We would like to begin this meeting of council by acknowledging that we are on the traditional treaty territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation of the Mississauga Nation. May we respectfully share in the responsibility of the stewardship and environmental protection of these ancestral lands. Now please join me in a moment of reflection. May we always be respectful of the responsibility of public office. May we accurately discern what is in the public good in our diverse community. May we work diligently for the best interests of our residents, and may we make wise decisions for the betterment of our town. Thank you very much. You may be seated. Mr. Clerk, call of the roll, please.
Your Worship, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, members of council are participating in this council meeting virtually. I can confirm that all councillors have joined the meeting on WebEx.
Thank you very much. Any declarations of interest, members of council? See none and hear none. I will make a declaration on the February 22nd Hospital Task Force Special Council meeting. I was not in attendance at the meeting, but I do have a conflict on it, which has been filed with the clerk. Now, motion on the minutes. We have a motion by Councillor Drum, seconded by Councillor Lee. Is there any wish to pull any of the minutes? Seeing none, is anyone opposed to adopting the minutes? Seeing nothing, hearing nothing, that's carried. Presentations, Mr. Clerk.
Your Worship, Inspector Moot from DRPS cannot be with us this evening, so that leaves one other presentation, being from Matthew Gaskell, Chief Administrative Officer, providing an update for COVID-19 for the town of Whitby. Mr. Gaskell, I'll place your presentation on the screen shortly.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Mr. Mayor, it's good evening to members of council and members of the public who are participating this evening. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to present an update on the town's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. It is certainly timely and topical in that, as council has indicated, we are commemorating the one-year anniversary of COVID-19 really coming to our community and impacting how all of us live and work. So as I've said it before, and we'll say it again, 2020 was a very challenging year for us all. The strange thing about the COVID-19 pandemic is that really it has made victims of us all in some way, shape, or form, whether it due to ill health, stress, social isolation, or just fear about what is transpiring and what could happen to our loved ones. It was a challenging year. 2021 is shaping up to be much of the same. And the town's planning for this year has been based upon the assumption that 2021 will be primarily influenced by the existence of the pandemic. Obviously, as has previously been indicated, not all is bad news. We have vaccines, and more vaccines are being approved, which certainly should speed the drive towards herd immunity. But nonetheless, 2021 will be heavily influenced by the COVID pandemic. And this week marks the 1-year anniversary of the first case of the infection in Whitby and the 1-year anniversary of the closure of town facilities. So it's clear this pandemic has impacted every single person who lives, works, or does business in our community and will continue to do so for some time. As you see on the slide in front of you, this is a timeline that really shows just a snapshot of some of the many actions that the organization has had to take as a result of the pandemic. And we've chosen to portray it in this way to really identify how the town has had to zigzag and change direction multiple times over the past year as a consequence of the circumstances and the change that has transpired oftentimes very rapidly in the circumstances. We've been operating consistently in a state of flux, which has impacted our staff and our community. I raise this to your attention to identify that town staff have done an exceptional job managing throughout this change. But I would be remiss in not identifying that it is taking its toll. The zigzag means a lack of consistency, a lack of certainty, a lack of understanding and knowing which direction you're going in your job in any given day. And the staff feel the effects of the pandemic in that regard. That's why it's important for us to create consistency when we can. For example, we continue to seek opportunities to bring back our part-time workers where and when it is possible, finding new ways to help support staff and service delivery. For example, bringing back part-timers to deliver essential services instead of hiring summer students. Our goal now, as it has always been, is to continue to deliver essential services during the pandemic, to prioritize health and safety of our residents and our staff throughout in our decision-making. Next slide, please. As you'll see on this slide, these are just some of the impacts that COVID-19 has had on our organization and our staff. With respect to service adjustments, we have been, for the better part of a year, reduced to essential services like grass cutting, waste collection, snow clearing, road maintenance, park maintenance. We have, through council, Council has approved a 0.55% budget increase overall related to the ongoing COVID restrictions. And that also factors in, again, service adjustments that will continue in 2021, which will mean things like not hiring summer students this year, except where we absolutely need them for things like mowing the boulevards. We've also will be continuing to have reduced staff as a result of reductions in in-person recreational programming. Additional adjustments and impacts that have come out of the COVID-19 is, as Council is all aware, is the no new staff in 2021 for growth. And Council approved the budget that means no new staff this year, which means that we are stretching our current workforce thin to continue to deliver services to a rapidly growing community. Council knows that, and staff know that, and certainly we don't disagree with it. We fully support the budget this year as being an essential contribution, the town's contribution ultimately towards all of the community's efforts in dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. There are other impacts as well, project delays. The priority over the past year has been to focus upon delivering essential services and to keep people safe. So a large number of projects that had been planned through our business plans and projects for 2020 and 2021 had been delayed, and staff are now working to complete more than 100 projects which had been delayed in 2020. And then, in addition, we have unknown pandemic costs. There are so many impacts that COVID-19 has had on the organization. There are direct costs, and then there are the indirect costs. And a large part of why I wanted to speak to council tonight and to the public is to speak a bit about the indirect costs, the costs of the pandemic on our staff, on the people. Likely, we don't yet know the full impact of the 12 months of this intense circumstance on staff, working in new environments. For many of our staff working from home, which is a very different circumstance, at times working from home when family members and children are at home as well. The stress of that. For those who are essential and have worked, continue to work in the field, the stress of knowing that they are working in an environment where others are isolating at home. It has caused stress, it has caused anxiety. I can tell you that anxiety was the #1 mental health issue from our staff in those seeking help through our employee assistance program in the past year, and the enhanced Mind Beacon program that we put in place to assist staff. In addition, we've also seen a 25% increase in anti-anxiety drug claims over the past year, which is quite substantial. I raise this just so that you, council, as our board, are aware of the impacts, because our staff have labored diligently, and at times it has taken a toll. From my own perspective, in my observations and interactions with members of staff and members of SLT, I have seen on multiple occasions individuals who are high performers, who are dedicated individuals suffering from stress. The stress of the circumstance, the stress of their personal circumstance, and dealing with work and family. There are lots of things to be learned from this situation, and we will learn much as we go forward and how we redesign, how we deliver services. We'll continue to examine what our offices look like going forward, our workspace needs, and how to continue to keep people safe. Certainly, we've learned much about how we deliver services to the public, and residents' expectations have likely changed over the past year as to how they want to access our services from wherever they are, as opposed to wanting to perhaps attend personally to access services. They certainly have an expectation that we have the capacity to do business virtually, and that's something that we've moved a long way towards over the past 12 months. So the bottom line is that things are not ever going to go back to the way that they were before entirely, pre-pandemic. Even moving to the green prevent level on the province's color-coded scheme does not mean that we're back to our previous normal. It merely means that we are at the lowest level of the provincial framework with continuing ongoing restrictions. For example, gathering limits remain, masks still need to be worn, and there will still be capacity limits at venues. So we will continue to assess what our new normal will be as we go forward and how we define what normal is within the provincial framework and beyond. Next slide, please. That's why we're always planning. We are continuing to plan to ensure that we can continue to deliver services to the community at every level of the framework. And this is a process that continues to evolve based upon updates from the province and as the health situation changes. For example, we have the Clerk's Department and Finance Department. They are aligning service delivery at each level of the framework, like delivering services by appointment to members of the public in the orange level. And the fact is, we've been through a number of the levels already and have a good idea of what to expect. And certainly, there is good news. As we've heard, there is light at the end of the tunnel as we learn and hear more about vaccination efforts from Durham Public Health. And I do give kudos to our colleagues at Durham Region and Durham Public Health who have worked diligently over the past 12 months to combat the COVID-19 pandemic in Durham Region, as have the staff of the town of Whitby. And I'm very proud of our staff. Due to everyone working together and following public health efforts, the corporation has avoided an outbreak Indeed, we've had very few confirmed infections amongst employees. And I want to thank staff for their continued vigilance in this regard. With new variants of COVID-19 propping up and operating within the provincial framework, we will continue to have changes, and we're going to have to continue to be flexible as we move to serve the community. We know that there are going to be ongoing impacts going forward on staff, on the community, and we are planning for that. We're thinking about what does the new normal look like for us as an organization. It might mean working from home, continuing where possible, providing virtual services and program offerings, planning and development services being provided virtually, conducting public engagements virtually. And while we definitely want to see events in person, I think we all need that, undoubtedly virtual events have been successful in some respects in connecting our community, and we will continue to explore how we can connect people in our community in a safe way. So what is definitely means, though, is that we will need to continue to operate as an agile workforce that is responsive to ongoing changes. Many public health commentators have said that this pandemic is likely to shift from being a pandemic to being endemic, which really means that it will be a part of our normal way of life, much the same as influenza and flu season is part of our normal way of life. COVID may well become part of our normal way of life as well. So I raise this to just emphasize the point that we will be going back to a different normal than we were living in January of 2020. COVID-19 undoubtedly is here to stay in some respect. It will be a part of how we live and do business. And the mitigation measures that we have implemented will be with us to some extent as we go forward. Next slide, please. But there's good news. Notwithstanding the existence of the pandemic, the laying off of over 200 staff a year ago, the closure of town facilities, there are many positive events that have been successfully concluded as a result of the efforts of staff. And I want to leave you with a positive message. Despite all these variables, our staff have continued to deliver services and do exceptional work. Even during a global pandemic and over and above our response to COVID-19, staff have completed many long-standing, outstanding goals of our organization. Foundational plans, projects, and systems that set us up exceptionally well for the future. Just a few examples of this are identified on this slide. We completed and delivered to Council the long outstanding culture plan. Our sustainability staff have delivered the Whitby Green Standard. We have implemented, at long last, a new Whitby website that is fully accessible, and we will be compliant with all provincial accessibility legislation going forward. We've initiated diversity, inclusion, and equity initiatives that have been outstanding, and we've done so in a very logical and commendable way. We've got Connect Whitby, new initiatives on engaging with the public. Council's approved the active transportation plan. We're undergoing the customer service strategy. The list of the initiatives that the organization has done in this past year, above and beyond just our response to COVID-19, is lengthy, and it is commendable. All of this was done during the pandemic. So I don't look at the outcomes of this pandemic as requiring an urgent need to go back in time. We have been effective in many respects during the pandemic, and we've learned a lot of lessons about what works and what doesn't in our current environment. And some of the lessons that we've learned underline that we need to do things differently, to think creatively, and to support our staff in what they do best, which is delivering services that truly do make a difference in our community. So that's my presentation to Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. CAO. Excellent. Questions on the presentation? Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Your Worship. To the CAO, thank you for providing stability during a time of volatility, safety when the risk was extended, and compassion to the staff, to businesses and residents during this most difficult time. I have two questions which address this time and going forward in the transformation. First of all, what advice would you be able to offer as to how the town may assist the region and the medical community in the distribution of the vaccine, apart from providing the locations for the vaccine distribution?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think that we are constrained in our capacity to assist the region beyond assisting them in providing a location for the vaccination clinics. We don't have the expertise in-house to assist in operating these clinics, but the region is aware that if they require assistance in any way as a consequence of the pandemic or this vaccination program, they only need to ask their lower tier partners for what we are capable of providing, and we will be there to assist them.
Thank you. And the follow-up through Your Worship to CAO Gaskell, there has been good news recently that a $2.23 million grant has been provided to the town of Whitby from the province. How will this be applied to offset the financial impact of COVID-19 in 2021?
Thank you for the question. I believe that the grant which was received or will be received later this year applies for both 2021 and 2022 for COVID-related costs. Initially, my expectation is that it will be used to offset the reduction in contribution to the asset management reserve, such that we will continue to make the normal contribution to the asset management reserve, and will rely upon these funds to make up the shortfall from the COVID-related shortage. Any additional funds that are remaining thereafter will be put into a reserve fund for 2022 COVID-related impacts pursuant to the province's direction.
And thank you. Through the Mayor, we are deeply grateful to you and your staff for the hard work during this past year and the contribution to the community going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Newman. I don't see any other questions in the chat box, so thank you, Mr. CAO, for that update. Mr. Clerk, delegations.
Your Worship, our first delegate this evening is Aaron Platt, partner with Davies Howe LLP on behalf of 70 Taunton Storage GP Corporation, speaking to item 6.2 on this evening's agenda, report PL 0621. Mr. Platt, you're on the line and you have 5 minutes to address council.
Thank you very much, sir. Can everyone hear me all right? I'm always concerned with the technology with these matters and want to make sure that I can be heard and I can be seen.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Good evening, Your Worship, members of council and staff. As you are aware, I'm counsel to 70 Taunton Storage GP. They are the owners immediately to the east of the subject lands of the report and applications that are before council this evening. Excuse me. I understand my letter of, or letters rather, of March 2nd and 3rd have been circulated to council, and I've also received the copy of staff's response to my March 3rd letter. I want to first thank Council for the indulgence in allowing me to speak to you this evening. I know it's a little bit outside your general protocol, but given the circumstances, I still appreciate your indulgence. I understand there was a slight mix-up in the delivery of the notice to my office, but in addition to the kind emails from the clerk's office, the town's in-house counsel called me this afternoon to explain what had occurred, and that call and that personal outreach was much appreciated. So I wanted to just commend that to members of council. With respect to the matter at hand, council is likely aware that around a year ago, my client was before you in respect of the approval of its own development applications on its site. As you may recall, council adopted staff's recommendations and approved an official plan and zoning amendment as sought by my client. What you may not recall is that my client's original proposal had its principal building located on the west side of its site, closest to the subject property. The drive aisle, rising north from Taunton Road, was located on the east side of the building, so away from the lands that are before you this evening. While staff were generally satisfied with that location, there were some concerns raised about the eventual connectivity or potential for connectivity of the two sites, being that they were both commercial on an arterial road. The applicant in particular raised concerns both at the statutory public meeting and later at the committee of the whole, where staff's final report was issued, which later went on to council. In particular, particularly early on, the applicant's land use plan raised issues with the location of my client's building because it would foreclose on the ability for that connectivity to reach from my client's site all the way to Baldwin Street South, which is at the western edge of the subject property that is before you today. It's important to note that the applicant's planner and comments on these particular issues were made well after the applicant knew that it would be constructing a building directly on the existing drive aisle through its site that would have then connected to my client's site. To summarize briefly, my client revised its site to allow for the continuation of that drive aisle, specifically in response to comments made at the statutory public meeting by the applicant. And notwithstanding that, the applicant continued to say that sufficient work hadn't been done, only to then bring forward an application that would put a building square on the location of that drive aisle, forever plugging it. I find it peculiar that such a requirement continued to be advocated by the application well after my client's applications were approved by this council, as it then appealed it on the basis of a lack of connectivity. In support of that appeal, the applicant's own land use planner, so not my client's land use planner, the land use planner who provided the planning rationale in support of the application before you, provided sworn testimony that there are a number of relevant policies in the official plan and the secondary plan that promote comprehensive planning related to matters such as integrated site circulation and connectivity, shared access, and minimizing the number of access points, particularly in this location. Again, my client revised its proposal to reflect those policies and the apprehensions raised by the applicant that that connectivity would not be possible any longer. However, the proposal before you today forecloses almost entirely on the future ability to connect these two commercial sites. I'm sure many of you have visited similar plazas and commercial sites in various parts of the town and, frankly, the region and other parts of the province, where such connectivity is not integrated in the planning of adjacent commercial sites. In those circumstances, and without that connectivity, a person traveling from one commercial site to the adjacent commercial site has to exit the property, drive onto the arterial road, and then loop back onto the next door site.
Mr. Platt, Mr. Platt, sorry, you're past your 5 minutes now. Any idea how much longer you would need?
I will perhaps maybe 2 minutes, and I will be brief.
Okay.
If I could have that indulgence, it would be most appreciated.
Thank you. Maybe a member of council could make a motion to add 2 minutes. We have a mover by Councillor Newman, seconded by Councillor Drum. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, that's carried. Sorry, sir. Now another 2 minutes then. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Council, and Your Worship. So in those situations, we have this problem where traffic now has to circulate off the site and back onto the neighboring site, disrupting movement on sidewalks, particularly in arterial locations. Notwithstanding the position I note in staff's report that an easement may no longer be required, without that inter-site connectivity, you are going to eventually have these issues of cars exiting one site and potentially entering onto the neighboring site, disrupting pedestrian flows and other traffic and transportation flows along Taunton Road. The term urban planning contains two essential thoughts: that it's urban and that there is a need to plan. The point of the exercise is to plan for the future, to as best as possible future-proof a site design. The current site before you does not do that. It does not do that, and it does not respond respectfully to the applicable policies of the official plan. It's also understood that the applicant plans to sever the site, and we don't yet know what inter-site connectivity is even going to be required as and amongst that site. It's worth mentioning that these matters were of such a concern that the applicant not only advocated for changes to my client's site, but appealed your decision to approve the my client's applications, because even providing for the continuation of the drive aisle in the conceptual site plan was insufficient. I find it peculiar that the applicant, through its planning team, have suggested that, while those concerns exist for my client's site, they should be completely disregarded and not applied to its own proposal. Your worship, members of council, to borrow a phrase, what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. Just as my client, my apologies, was required to at least demonstrate where such a drive aisle could be placed, the same should be required for the applicant here. Respectfully, it's a large site, and even if the current location is no longer possible, where there's already an easement in favor of the town, there are other locations on the site that should be identified for such access, particularly as the applicant is proposing a future severance of the site from the balance of its lands. As a result, I am here tonight to ask that council not accept staff's recommendations at this time, and instead send the matter back to staff with a direction that the applications be revised to demonstrate an appropriate location for a drive aisle providing access from Baldwin Street South through to 70 Taunton Road, so that the adjacent commercial sites can be comprehensively planned for integrated site circulation, connectivity, and shared access as contemplated by your official plan and as promoted by the applicant's own planner. Thank you for the indulgence and the additional time. Thank you for letting me speak this evening. Those are the balance of my submissions, subject to any questions of the council or your worship.
Thank you, Mr. Platt. Members of council, any questions to the delegation? Okay, I see none. Thank you very much. Mr. Clerk.
Your worship, our next delegates this evening are Alan Scully from Smart Centers and David Bronskill, Goodman's LLP, and Mike Rohr, Grossfields, speaking to item 6.2 on tonight's agenda, report PL 0621. Gentlemen, you have 5 minutes to address council.
Thank you to the clerk, and good evening to council. This is David Bronskill from Goodman's LLP. I'll be speaking on behalf of Mr. Scully and Mr. Dror, so you'll just be mercifully hearing from me tonight. And I'm here just to respond to the last delegation that you heard, and frankly complete the incomplete picture that was given to you through those submissions. Contrary to what was suggested to you, comprehensive planning, in fact, has now occurred for these properties. And the memo from your town staff in front of you is clear, and I quote, "It's no longer necessary or beneficial for the town to require access between the two properties." What Mr. Platt did not say in his submissions to you was that what our client had said, both through its planning consultant and through deputations to you as council and in our appeal letter, was that our client simply wanted an opportunity to do this comprehensive planning and to ensure that the final access arrangements between the two properties were determined. That was all they had requested. At the time, town staff did not agree, and you as town council also did not agree, and you will recall that you in fact approved the application for Mr. Platt's client. Our client then filed an appeal, and the concerns were not about the use, but again about the failure to confirm the final access relationship between the lands and the easements that may or may not be required. At that time, town staff indicated those matters could be resolved at the site plan stage. Mr. Platt's client agreed with this approach, and as I noted, so ultimately did you as a council. And so ultimately did the local planning appeal tribunal. Our client did appeal your decision, but LPAT ultimately dismissed our client's appeal and endorsed the approach of your town staff. And our client did not challenge the LPAT decision further and accepted that approach as the rules of the game. To quote Mr. Platt, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. That is now the same approach being taken by town staff with respect to our client's application. And Mr. Platt and his client simply don't like it or are looking to find a way to delay approval of my client's application through now taking a different approach to our client's application than they did to their own. Some of the claims that he's now making to you are frankly completely at odds with the submissions that he made to the local planning appeal tribunal. I'm going to use just a few examples from the materials that Mr. Platt filed on behalf of his client at LPAT. He's suggesting to you now that it's premature until access issues are resolved. And yet in the materials he filed, he indicated that the approval was not premature, but would be resolved through the site plan approval process. That's exactly what town staff are saying with the application here. He noted that the Taunton storage approval had designed its site not to ensure the extension of the town's easement, but to, quote, permit the extension of the town's easement if required. And as I noted to you earlier, town staff have determined that it's no longer required. His land use planner, Mr. Mackay, in paragraph 51 of his affidavit, noted, and I quote, "The purpose of zoning bylaw amendments is to establish land uses and development standards for the development of the lands. They do not establish or extinguish real estate rights of or between parties or properties." That is exactly contrary to what Mr. Platt is now urging upon you. He suggests there should be comprehensive planning now in his submissions to you, and yet in his submissions to LPAT, he noted he dismissed any concern about comprehensive planning and called it a need by my client to, quote, control the clock and characterize it as, quote, advantage-seeking behavior. His planner, Mr. Mackay, in his affidavit indicated the appropriate time to determine what, if any, further easement rights may be required is the site plan approval process. As I noted, LPAT ultimately agreed with this, and they noted it was consistent with the town approach to securing easements over my client's property. We would simply ask for the same approach to be taken here yet again, the same approach Mr. Platt recommended to the tribunal, the same approach that his planner indicated was appropriate at this stage, zoning bylaw amendment of the process, and to note simply that the tribunal has no ability in considering a zoning bylaw amendment to force the town to decide whether to retain the Callaway easement and extend it over any additional properties. That's the approach that we would urge here. That's the approach your town staff are urging upon you. And we would simply indicate that you should endorse that staff recommendation. And if Mr. Platt and his client wish to continue to somehow take on this file with a different position they took at the tribunal, well, there's an appeal tribunal, and that's the appropriate place to resolve that, not through further delay or deferral. Thank you very much, Your Worship.
Thank you. Members of council, any questions to the delegation? Seeing none and hearing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Clerk.
Your Worship, our final delegates this evening are Roger Miller from Miller Planning Services and Andrew Scrow from Broccolini Construction, speaking to item 6.3 on tonight's agenda, Report PL 0721. Gentlemen, you have the floor and you have 5 minutes to address Council.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Good evening, Mayor Mitchell and members of Council. My name is Roger Miller from Miller Planning Services. We're here this evening on behalf of the Gerard Limited Partnership, also known as Broccolini Construction, owners of a 64-acre parcel of employment lands at the northeast corner of Gerard and Conlin Roads in Whitby. This property is the subject of applications for a local official plan amendment and a zoning bylaw amendment, and are the subject of item 6.3 from the February 22nd Committee of the Whole agenda. As the clerk mentioned, Mr. Andrew Schroe is with me this evening. He's Development Manager of Broccolini Construction. Members of Council, we're here this evening to simply answer any additional questions that Council may have. As some of the Council members are aware, we did appear on February 22nd of this year to support the recommendations of the planning staff in the report that evening. And we were able to answer a few questions from the committee members, but we thought that in the event that there were additional questions from the balance of Council, that my client had asked that we appear and address any of those remaining questions that may exist. Mr. Mayor, those are my comments, and we're happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Miller. Members of Council, any questions to the delegation? I see none and I hear none. Thank you very much, Mr. Miller.
Thank you.
Now we are going to correspondence. We have a motion by Councillor Shahid, seconded by Councillor Lee. Mr. Clerk, was there an amendment on the first bullet point of that motion? Was it?
Correct, Your Worship, there is, and I've put it on the screen here. It's just to align the dates with the recently announced National Day of Observance, which is March 11th, for the flying the flags at half-mast.
Okay. So the mover and the seconder, you see that change. Are you both agreeable to moving with that amendment that's now showing on the screen? Councillor Shahid?
Yes, Your Worship.
Councillor Lee?
Yes, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Lee?
Yes, not a problem. Thank you.
Yep, thank you very much. Okay, so that is before us. Anyone want to pull any items? Don't see that. Is anyone opposed? And I see none, so those items of correspondence are carried. Thank you. Now we move to the Committee of the Whole report. Motion by Councillor Yamada, seconded by Councillor Mulcahy. We have items 6.1 through 6.6. Are there any polls? Okay, 6.1 through 6.6. I don't see any hands. Thank you. If someone would, for my benefit, just pull 6.3, I have a question. I see Councillor Newman's pulled 6.4. Councillor Leahy, 6.3. So 6.1, 6.2, 6.5, 6.6 are before us. So I will call the vote on those. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, that's those are carried. The item on 6.3, my one question to the Commissioner, Commissioner Saunders, is there was the submission from the Cycling Coalition. That came up when this was at committee as well. Could you just summarize how that's being responded to?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. We did receive the correspondence from the Durham Regional Cycling Coalition, and we did forward the memo that had been prepared last week and was submitted to council. We shared that with the representatives from the coalition, who have gotten back to us today and indicated that they are satisfied with how it is to be handled. Both their comments related to the treatment of Gerard Road and Conlon Road, as well as the internal active transportation issues to be dealt with through the site plan, and that they will continue to dialogue with staff to ensure that their concerns are addressed. So I'm hoping that is sufficient, but if there was anything in particular, please let me know.
No, that's great. Thank you very much. Any further questions on 6.3, members of council? Seeing none, is anyone opposed? Seeing none, hearing none, that's carried. Item 6.4 is moved and seconded. In the green folder, there is an amendment that was discussed at committee, and item 2. Wondering if there's the mover and the seconder are prepared to adopt that amendment as part of their motion. Okay, thank you. So that's on that amendment. So is anyone opposed to the amendment?
Question, Your Worship?
On the amendment?
Yes, I do.
Okay, on the amendment.
I'll wait and my question is just this: knowing the heights of the Brookfield development to the south of the MTSAs, will this sort of preclude the heights in the MTSAs to go similar to what is occurring down in the waterfront area?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe that what this proposed change in the recommendation does is to support the existing policy regime and structure that is in the approved secondary plan for the Port Whitby area. So it wouldn't change anything from what council has already put in place.
So just for clarification then, what is the maximum height that would be able to go in the MTSA area?
Well, off the top of my head, I can't recall. It is 18 stories, I believe, maybe more. Again, it's what is identified in the secondary plan. What this is intended to do is not allow for greater heights to be imposed beyond what council has already approved through the secondary plan, which I entirely support.
We feel that going at 18 stories will be enough for us to meet our density targets outlined through a place to grow.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the amount of density required to accommodate the 2031 forecasts have been already dealt with, and the densities required to accommodate the region's ongoing exercise are yet to be determined. So the region should complete its entire intensification exercise before imposing anything on micro areas to the municipalities. So it goes to some of the comments in the report that speak to rather than piecemealing this exercise as it relates to intensification and overall density, that it should be done as part of the comprehensive review in its entirety. And I think that this simply supports that on an ongoing basis.
Thank you.
Okay, any further, you have a question on the amendment, Councillor Newman?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. To Commissioner Saunders, the amendment does not distinguish between residential and non-residential developments. Does that, in being generalized, does that do away with any discretion that may be necessary in each of those areas?
I'm not entirely sure of the question, but again, the Port Whitby area, and in particular the transit community, the area around the GO station, was comprehensively reviewed, and the requirements for density as the focal point for the town's intensification study were addressed at that time. So this is, I believe, trying to ensure that that work is not undone. Now, there are other areas that are identified for intensification further away from the GO station, but those again are recognized in the Port Whitby secondary plan, and I believe that the highest heights permitted in the plan relate to the Brookfield development. Other areas are, depending on the designation, high density, are, as I mentioned, I believe capped at 18 stories.
Thank you. Just a follow-up to try to clarify, then, does the town retain its discretion to alter what currently exists with respect to the planning requirements under the secondary plan in relation to density through the amendment?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes. Council always has the ability to amend its official plan in whatever way it deems to be necessary and appropriate. This would not prevent that. To the contrary, I believe that it leaves that power in the hands of council to do as it sees fit.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anything further on the amendment? If not, I'll call the vote. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, that's carried. And now the motion as amended. Any further discussion? If not, anyone opposed? Seeing none, that's carried. Thank you very much. We now turn to general government. We have a motion by Councillor Roy, seconded by Councillor Drum. Items 7.1 through 7.26, 7.23 having been deferred. Mover and a seconder. Are there any polls on the general government agenda? Councillor Newman, 7.13. Others? Okay. Seeing no others, I would like if someone could pull, Mr. Clerk, which is the one about the Creative Communities team? $716? Yes. Could someone pull 716? I did want to make a comment about that. Thank you, Councillor Shahid. All right, so on the remainder, with the exception of 713 and 716, is anyone opposed? And that is carried. Thank you very much. Councillor Newman, 713.
Thank you, Your Worship. This item relates to the customer service strategy, and the question is directed to the CAO or clerk. To the extent that the goal is to achieve a consistent, integrated, flexible, and time-responsive customer service strategy, is training contemplated after this report is finalized to address perhaps changes, first of all, use of any new technology that may result, and secondly, changes in behavior with respect to the reporting and communication required in tracking requests? Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Mitchell, to Councillor Newman. In terms of training, we've been treating that as a separate project from the strategy, and it is ongoing. We had engaged a third-party firm with efforts to train most of our full-time staff and some of our part-time staff. The training really focuses on the customer service basics, and it was intended to be in person, but this year we pivoted to, well, this year and last year we pivoted to virtual training. And given the pandemic and change in service delivery, it was actually an excellent opportunity to refresh staff in terms of customer service basics, but also how we need to pivot to provide customer service in different ways through technology. So that's been fairly effective. I don't have the numbers in front of me in terms of how many staff have gone through that, but we are hopeful to put the majority of our staff through that training before it wraps up later this year.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion on 713? If not, anyone opposed to 713? Seeing nothing, hearing nothing, I would declare that carried. And now item 716, and the comment I wanted to make here, I wanted to commend our CAO and his team on this initiative. We have, of course, as been mentioned earlier in the CAO's presentation, that we have adopted our first culture plan. We actually just did that, which is very important. But as we know, you can adopt plans, and plans can sometimes languish. Well, I think this is a tremendously important report that we've created a Creative Communities team. Director Klein, Manager Kruss, and Lara Scott, lead of our special events, and then they will need some additional support going forward. But the delivery of the culture plan, the implementation of the culture plan, downtown development, special events and tourism are all being managed under the auspices of that team. So it's really a high level of transparency and accountability, and a great group of staff too. So, and those are all very much interrelated in what our council is trying to achieve in terms of, you know, a quality of place and how that's an economic, huge economic benefit and huge potential down the road to us. So to put the process in place that you know is going to ensure there's accountability and transparency and simplicity in understanding who you go to get these ideas and how you get them implemented. So Mr. CAO, my kudos to you. I think it's a very important initiative and perfect to bring it alongside the culture plan. So I did want to share those comments. So having said that, anything further from members of council before I call the vote on 7.16? Seeing none, that's carried. Thank you. That was a mighty agenda to get through that quickly. That's great. So now we move, I believe, to Section 8, Mr. Clerk, the Audit Committee. Motion by Councillor Leahy, seconded by Councillor Lee. Any questions or polls on item 8.1? Is anyone opposed to 8.1? Thank you. That's carried. And now we're no notices of motion. Is there any other business, members of council? Seeing none, hearing none. Motion on the bylaws, moved by Councillor Newman, seconded by Councillor Mulcahy. Any polls or questions? Sorry, Councillor Roy.
Sorry, Mayor Mitchell, I couldn't type fast enough. I just want to take the opportunity. I know this is the second year for having Women's Day with the members of council that are present, but today being the International Women's Day, I would like to give great acknowledgement to my female colleagues on council, but also to the females and the managers and staff of our town of Whitby as well too. It is about leadership, and I think that it's very fitting to give recognition to the women in our community, young and old, and from all walks of life. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Yes, well said. And it is International Women's Day, and when you go down our staff now and the leads on our staff, you sometimes actually struggle to see a male name in a lot of situations, which is excellent, because you know, the demands of this business is that you have to pick the best talent to move ahead, and that's what our CAO and his team are doing, and Creative Communities team. It's great. So thank you. Nothing else on bylaws. Is anyone opposed to the bylaws? I see none. So that is carried. Now we do have 3 reports, appointments to advisory committees. Does anyone feel any need to go into closed session to discuss these recommendations? Councillor Newman wishes to move in camera. Could I have a seconder, please, to that so we can go in camera? Second. Councillor Newman, is that just on one item, or is that on all of the items?
It is on one item, Your Worship, 12.1.
12.1, okay. Does anyone wish to go in camera on 12.2 or 12.3? I see nothing and hear nothing, so is anyone opposed to 12.2 or 12.3? So those are carried, and now Mr. Clerk will go into camera. Oh, I need a motion. We have a mover and a seconder. Is anyone opposed to going into camera on 12.1? I see none, so that's carried. And we will go into camera, and the clerk will advise us when we're free to discuss it. Thank you. Clerk. During the closed portion of the meeting, council discussed personal matters about identifiable individuals. So members of council, we now have 12.1 back in front of us with a mover and a seconder. Is anyone opposed to that recommendation? And I see none. The clerk will now announce the appointments as we normally do.
Your Worship, I've just placed it on the screen here. So council has just appointed Vinita Anderson to the Whitby Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Committee for the term ending November 14th, 2022. And to the Road Watch Committee, we have appointed Shanita Foster and Vincent Kang, again for the same term. And likewise, Harry Agar to the Groveside Cemetery Board for the same term.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Confirmatory bylaw moved by Councillor Shahid, seconded by Councillor Mulcahy. Anyone opposed? Seeing none. And motion to adjourn, Councillor Mulcahy, Councillor Drum. Is anyone opposed? And that's carried. Thank you very much, members of council and staff.